Good morning. Welcome to this first forum of the day on climate change. My name is Jacob Nielsen. I am the editor-in-chief of a Danish political website, Altinget. Until very recently, I worked for the Danish newspaper Politiken, and I covered climate change in different positions. I was a correspondent for some years in the United States, and a couple of years ago, I spent a whole night on the ice cap on the north side of Alaska with whalers. The Inupiaq, the name of the Inuits living there, of Alaska, embody the dilemma of the modern industrial world. So every year they experience less ice and a shorter season, which seriously affects their possibilities for do the subsistence hunting and to get the whales. But at the same time, the little town or city of Barrow, the northernmost city of the United States, has experienced enormous growth in wealth thanks to the oil and gas exploration going on in Alaska at the same time. So obviously a lot of people and the whole society is split between what they see with their own eyes and what they experience in terms of economy and growth possibilities and social issues. And I think that experience goes to the heart of the discussion that we're going to have in this room today. Because I think it's increasingly clear for everyone that the whole climate debate embodies a lot of different debates, and there's a lot of connected debates that need to be tied together if we need to get the full overview. The energy transformation, the social issues, the growth challenge, all have to come together to find the right path towards a climate-resilient economy. And to explore this challenge, we have an excellent panel today. In a minute, we will have a keynote presentation from Isabelle Cogère, the CEO of the French energy company Engie. And after Madame Cogère's initial remarks, we will have an excellent panel up here that I will introduce to you in a few minutes. And I really invite you, everybody in the room, to join in the discussion. I think on the screens up here there is an introduction as to how to do it. You can put your questions in your seats with your tablet or your mobile phone or whatever device you're using with your laptop, and I will get them in some magical way on this laptop, on this iPad up here, and I will try to bring in as many of your points and questions as possible during the debate, so please feel free to join in so that we can have as inclusive a debate as possible this morning. Oh yeah, and by the way, we didn't catch a whale that night in Alaska, but to the great regret of my photographer, they got the whale 3 days after we left. But let me now move on to the first speaker of the day, Isabelle Cogère. Isabelle Cogère is an engineer by education. She was an advisor to Prime Minister Lionel Jospin and later joined the Suez Group, changing into GDF Suez. And in 2016, she became the CEO of the company, which is now transformed into Engie. She was the first French woman to lead a company in the CAC 40, the list of the biggest industrial companies in France. And when she goes to work in the morning, she takes her car. But it's a non-carbon hydrogen car. So she does that with a clean conscience. Please join me in welcoming Isabelle Cogère.
Thank you for these words, and it's a pleasure, of course, to be here to introduce this first session of this full day and this important forum, and to give to share with you my convictions about what we are all experiencing, which is energy revolution. Let's first explore maybe the forces behind this revolution. I'm convinced that it is not, first of all, a technical move we experienced. It's first of all a revolution in the heads, because I'm convinced that climate change changes a lot of things, and not only climate. In fact, this is, when we look at the history, this is the very, very first global challenge, the very first time every decision everywhere in the world has an impact on everybody. And this is creating a kind of forced solidarity. You know, I worked for years in another sector, in the water industry, and I have experienced the fact that even if you have very, very deep crises in some regions in the world, in fact, it doesn't change anything in developed countries because, well, it's not their problem. It's maybe it's very disappointing, but it is really the case. And here we face the very global challenge. And then this revolution in the head, the fact that everybody understands that we cannot pursue as we did in the past, had already have a lot of very concrete consequences. The first one is that there is a lot of money in the market to finance this revolution. First of all, public money, and it started here in Europe. First of all, the European countries, they started pushing this revolution through very strong subsidiaries. And, well, then it has been the same in other regions, but it started in Europe. So first of all, public money, and now a lot of private money, because all the investors, more and more, they have to demonstrate that they spend their money on very meaningful investments. So a lot of money. First consequence of this revolution in the head. Second consequence, a lot of and very rapid technical progresses. Maybe the most spectacular is the solar technology. I remember that less than 10 years ago, it was in 2008, the feed-in tariff for solar in France here was 700 euros per megawatt hour. Even if you are not specialist of energy prices, you just have to know that it is extremely, extremely expensive. Energy in France with nuclear industry costs 40, let's say. Even more, a little more with the new investments we have to do. But so you see the gap. We started with this gap. Less than 10 years later, we are at 30 euro or dollar per megawatt hour in some regions in the world. Not yet in France, but it will come. So it is a huge, extremely rapid, without any equivalent pace of change and maturation of technology. And I mentioned solar, but I could also speak about wind and now storage of energy. And all this technical evolution, they make that effectively it's not crazy to believe that a very different energy world is possible. In energy, we are used to describe it as a 3D world. The first D is for decarbonization. And it means that progressively, oil and coal, they will be replaced by gas and renewable. In our view, gas is in the landscape because it is probably the way to secure, stabilize the grid. And by the way, we work to make this gas more and more green, and one day it will be fully green, probably. So the first D is for decarbonization. The second D is for decentralization, because this new technology, renewable technology, they probably open the door to very different kind of energy infrastructure. And our belief is that progressively a bigger and bigger part of the energy consumed will be produced on site, on the site of consumption. So in your home, in your buildings where you work, in the industrial platforms, we will see more and more local facilities to produce and to store energy. Probably in a lot of cases, it will rely on solar, but also on geothermal, on wind in some cases, if you have the landscape for that and the land for that, the place for that. So a big part of it will be decentralized. And the specialists, they tell us maybe it could reach 50%, 50, of the production. So it's not marginal at all. And the last D is for digitalization, because what I just described, these decentralized systems, they fully rely on digital. Let's imagine if you have a rooftop, a solar panel in your roof, if you have batteries, You need to connect the two, of course. You need also to connect each and every facility and device in your home, consuming energy. And then it's a world of IoT, Internet of Things. It's a world of data management, because you need to balance all of these devices each millisecond. And it is a world of software. In our industry, energy industry, more and more the know-how will be in softwares. And by the way, we invest on that as far as NG is concerned. So 3D, decarbonized, decentralized, digitalized. This is a better world, really, I believe. I mean, it's not only, and it's already a lot, of course, but it's not only the way to battle against climate change, because we will progressively decarbonize the system. It is also a way to do what we never have been able to do, that is to say, to bring energy to everybody. Because these small systems, these decentralized systems, they are much easier to implement, and it is much more rapid. And we see a lot of geographies where there is not yet the traditional grid. No networks, no big plants. And then in Africa, in particular, in a lot of cases, these countries, they will go directly to this next generation of infrastructure, decentralized infrastructure, through mini-grid, for example. And we all believe and feel that to implement all these mini-grids in parallel, it is a parallel model, which be much more rapid, much easier, and probably cheaper than to take the time to develop these big investments throughout the countries, big networks. So it is a better world because, well, climate change is, of course, a big challenge for everybody in this planet, but also access to energy for everybody. It is reachable now, and that's the first time it is reachable. And finally, we are also convinced that all these new technologies, they will allow us to review a lot of equipments. You mentioned my car. It is a hydrogen car. I have to tell you that I've been obliged to buy a Japanese one because there is not yet European and French models fueled by hydrogen. But green mobility will, in fact, open the door to not only decarbonized cars, as mine is today, but also to much easier systems to transport yourself in the city. These EV, electric vehicle systems, we are working on with a lot of other players, with share car systems, with smart traffic systems, will probably lead to a city which will be much more comfortable and with a better quality of life, which is the title of this session. So it is a better world. As NG, if I tell you just 1 second a word about our group, we have decided to be a leader, a forerunner of this world, which is not to be the biggest. It's not that we are trying to do. We are trying to be extremely specific. We have defined 3 criteria to be this leader. First of all, to be extremely coherent. That is to say that, well, we had the chance to start our plan 1 year ago with 80% of our activities exactly in line with what I just mentioned. That is to say, decarbonized fuels and technologies, and a lot of activities already in the decentralized world. 80%. So to be coherent, what does it mean? It means that we are currently disposing the remaining 20% in order to reinvest them in these new technologies. So to be coherent, to be a forerunner. I mean, a lot of new technologies are already available, and a lot of others are just about to come, or have to be pushed to be able to come one day. Hydrogen is not yet economic at all. So it is an example where we have decided as a group to spend a lot of resources, HR and financial resources, in order to provoke the maturation of this technology. So hydrogen is an example. More generally, green mobility is another. Storage, energy storage, which is of course one of the key challenges we face, is another theme. Second criteria, so to be a forerunner, to invent the future. And the third one is to work on ourselves, because as a group, we are a big organization, we have a presence in 70 countries, we have 155,000 collaborators. You can feel, I'm sure, the huge effort we have to do in order to, well, appropriate this new world and to be really supportive of it. So we spend a lot of time, energy, management energy also, to provoke the full awareness of our internal organization and to make that all these collaborators, all these people, they are really players of this move. So now I believe the key theme we will discuss is how to make that the regulation really pushes this move and support it, accelerating it. I believe it's effectively a key point we have to set up. Thank you very much.
You get to choose. So thank you very much for these inspiring introductory remarks. I would now at this point like to invite the rest of the panel to join us up here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to yes, there you go. So, let me just briefly introduce the rest of the panel to you. If we start with second from the right, we have Xiji Bao, who was actually supposed to have been in China today, where he lives. There is a very big energy conference, an energy forum with energy ministers from all over the world taking place in Beijing today. So we're very pleased that you chose to make the effort to be here with us today. Xiji is the Director General of the Development Research Center, a state institution in Beijing. He has a bachelor's degree in math and a PhD from City University in the UK. And since '96, so for a lot of years, he has been working in different roles with the restructuring of the Chinese economy. And he told me just before the forum that he is currently working with the no small task of trying to convince the Chinese to take the bike to work instead of taking their car. And Xiji himself actually bikes to work 10 kilometers every day to get to work. Then we have Céline, and I'm going to have to use my notes to get your last name right, because it's a long French last name. Cherevillat, is that almost right? Almost. Céline is the director of the Institute of the European Environmental Policy, Institute for European Environmental Policy in Brussels, and also currently the chair of the board of the Climate Action Network in Europe. She's been working in many roles over the years in being an advocate of sustainable development, and has been working both in DC and other places in this capacity. The website Euractiv recently named her one of the 30 most influential people on energy policy in Europe, and Céline also bikes to work every morning, and she told me that the advantage of biking to work in Brussels, where she lives, is that you get to work on a very alert basis, because you need to have a 360-degree outlook all the way to work, because it's so dangerous in Brussels in terms of the traffic. So. Next to Céline is Femke Grothus, who is, and I apologize for my Dutch, Femke is the founder and the president of the X-Tax project, a think tank focused on the role that taxes can play in the transformation of the economy. She's a political scientist and has lived and worked in 3 continents in this field. Femke calls herself a wave maker and was interviewed by Forbes magazine in a piece with the headline, "How Taxes Can Change the World," and she's going to tell us more about that in a minute. Femke also, and we're getting into a kind of a trend here, Femke also bikes to work. She has only 10 minutes to work. She does own a car, but it is of course a Prius, another Japanese. car. Next to me is Philip Jennings, and Philip is has been the Secretary General for UNI, the Global Union, since 2000. He represents more than 20 million people, 20 million members in more than 150 countries, and is also married to a Danish woman, which I thought was interesting. So am I. So, yeah, yes. Philip takes the bus or his car to go to work, but does admit that most often he does take a plane to go to work, actually. But as a mean of redemption, he has personally been the driving force behind putting solar panels on the top of the office building where he works. So there's some payback there. And then last but not least, we have Simon Upton, who is the environmental director of the OECD, and who played a key role in developing the OECD Green Growth Strategy. And Simon also has experience from the other side of the aisle. He used to be a member of parliament and a minister for environment in New Zealand, and told me that you take the metro to go to work. So there you have it. Not a lot of carbon emitters in this panel. And after all this introduction and the keynote of Isabelle Cougère, I think one thing that is probably on many of your minds, and certainly on mine, is that, of course, today there's an elephant in the room. Almost physically an elephant from the grand old party, the Republicans, the elephant that came out last week when President Trump announced that the US is backing out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And of course, a lot of this panel is going to directly or indirectly focus on what consequences that is going to have, and how the rest of the world, both on a policy level and on private sector level and on organizations, NGO level, what they could and should do to try to work around that. And I would like to start with you, Isabelle Cougère, following up on your opening remarks. So you said there is a kind of inevitability that this is a non-stoppable project because of all the points that you mentioned, that it's decentralized, that it's market-driven, and there's a lot of money in the market for this. But knowing that the US pulled out last week, as you see it, is this project now so much market-driven that it is non-stoppable, even if a major player like the United States decides to backtrack and leave the Paris Agreement?
No, of course, can you hear me? The Trump's decision is a very bad signal, that's clear. And in my view, it's bad, especially for the US players. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the reactions of the industrial players, for example. Yeah. Because for them, it means that the risk is to stay away from this move, which is effectively, in my view, maybe I'm wrong, but unstoppable. Why? We mentioned the fact that, well, it is a way, all these new technologies, to battle against something which is seen by everybody, all the young generation, and more generally, everybody as a key challenge. First, it is a way to accelerate access to energy, second, and third element, which is, in my view, not sufficiently, well, mentioned by people, is the fact that in this new technology, they will allow a lot of emerging countries to solve one of their biggest problems, which is energy independence. These emerging countries, they need a lot of energy to fuel their growth, a lot of. In a lot of cases, they have no access to energy resources in their own territory. What does it mean? It means that each and every year, they increase their dependency on others. And here there is a geopolitical aspect to this energy revolution. And it is extremely important, in my view, to measure it. Take a country like Chile or Morocco, the same. These countries, they need a lot of energy. They have a lot of natural resources, copper, etc., but nothing in terms of energy. And then, nothing. I see your body language. Maybe we can have a discussion after. Nothing. In Chile, zero. It means that Chile relied on Argentina to buy gas through a pipe going through the Andinas, And Chile will very suddenly one day explain the fact that Argentina said, no, I need these guys for my country. So this dependency is something when I discuss with government representatives, and maybe there are some in this room, it is extremely important, maybe more than CO2 in fact. And this energy revolution is for them really like a gift, you know. This huge resource in their field is a way to solve that. It is important to measure what it represents in terms of amount of energy. The solar energy, if I rely on the best specialists in the AEA, etc., and other bodies, they say that if we value the solar energy, it accounts for 20 times the yearly energy consumption. Well, there are sun everywhere, not exactly spread the same way, nevertheless. It is so very well spread in the world. It is very flexible as a technology. And then here's something which means that, in my view, the Trump's decision, even if it is really, in my view, nonsense, an historic nonsense, in my understanding, it won't stop this move. So it is not yet a fully market-driven move, not yet, even if there is a lot of money in the table. It is also a question of regulation. That's the reason why I believe the theme you have chosen for this panel is extremely important. But Trump's decision cannot stop this move.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Shiji, when President Trump announced his decision last week, he specifically mentioned China, as did, by the way, also the Bush administration in was that 2001, when they decided to leave the Kyoto Protocol. It was because China was not in the agreement. That was one of the main arguments. And last week again, China was at the heart of the argument, because, as he said, they will be allowed to continue to just build one coal plant after another, and we can't build any at all. And I wanted to bring that to you and to see how do you expect. Do you expect any policy changes in China because of this decision, or is it also in China an unstoppable project? We talked about just before the panel how climate change is embodied in so many other policies in China. So could you try to give us a perspective from Beijing? Do you see any immediate consequences of this decision?
Okay. Thank you for your kind introduction. And as to President Trump's announcement, I think we were shocked. But also it is expected, according to what he said during his campaign for the presidential position. But as to whether climate change is a Chinese hoax, it's for people to judge. As to how to deal with the new situation, and I think the Chinese government made it clear that we have made our commitment, and we are willing to work with other nations, especially EU, to achieve that goal. That's so far we've heard from the government. As to the China-US bilateral agreement on climate change issues, I don't know how President Trump is going to handle that, and I don't know how China is going to react to that. But I would like to see that we are committed to the climate change issue seriously. We embedded that climate strategy into our development strategy. So I would like to spend a few minutes just to talk about how we as a developing country see this climate change issue. People from developing countries faced with different set of problems, issues from people from the developed ones. Given any developing country, a set of issues like climate change, innovation, poverty reduction, etc., you see that in most of the country, poverty reduction, healthcare, and quality education, I think would come on the very top. I think this is basically summarized in the United Nations SDG goal. Number one is poverty, no poverty and no hunger, and quality and health and well-being and the quality education. I think climate policies comes to 13th out of the 17 goals. That somehow reflects how developing countries prioritize different set of issues. For us, we see development as the key. Just as the President Xi Jinping said a month ago in the One Road and One Belt Forum, said that development is the master key to all the problems. I think we have implemented that philosophy in our development national strategy. We have been pursuing a development strategy which is innovation-driven, coordinated, green, open, and inclusive. Climate change strategy is embedded in this national development strategy. That's one, how to say, the perspective from developed countries that climate change strategy is embedded in the national development strategy. Second, I would like to echo what the speaker Isabel just said, that innovation is driving revolution in energy. I think innovation is very much in the heart of China's development strategy. China has increased its investment in research and development. Last year, we spent more than $250 billion in research and development. And I think we are the second largest spender on research and development. We are carrying out serious research and development to create knowledges for sustainable development. Second, that Chinese, I think, entrepreneurs industry have been trying to be innovative in developing some business models to promote green development. Just take the electricity car as an example. I think last year, China sold over 300,000 passenger cars, electricity cars in the road, plus electricity buses. I think we are the biggest producers of electricity cars. And we are seeing that companies are coming to innovative business models. Like the shared car, the Didi is trying to use an electricity car for people to hire, to facilitate people to use electricity cars. And one company in Chongqing, they are developing a module that you do not own your car. You can just always use your car, but the car uses battery, which is removable. They have the company watching over, manage your battery. So they take the anxiety of battery life away. So they will monitor where you are, track where you are, and then send the battery to replace it within just 1-2 minutes, and then you will be back on move. So we are seeing all kinds of innovations coming out of this. And just you mentioned that about the future car ownership. We are, imagine what future Chinese society would be. We are building the high-speed rail network, and we're trying to develop this shared car ownership. And because we cannot imagine that with a country with geographic size and slightly bigger than the US, with the same kind of ownership rate. That means 4 times cars on road as the US has at this moment. That's unimaginable. So we are induced by the demand to be innovative. And also we have been using this green energy strategies to help poverty reduction. So that's somehow innovation strategies, innovation policy can be connected with social policy. I'll stop here, but I'll come back later.
No, but thank you, it's very fascinating. And I think being a journalist, I think if I was to summarize your answer, if the question is, Does the Trump decision affect China's policy? The answer is no.
Yeah,
It seems full speed ahead. Yes, very good. I think what we'll do now is we'll take the first question from the floor, and I think that that goes directly to you, Celine, maybe to try to answer that. The question is how to resolve the paradox of increasing consumption, which drives growth, but also results often in unsustainable consumption of resources. And I think that goes to the heart of some of the things that you've been looking into.
Thank you for the question. Well, as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, there's the SDG 12, which is about sustainable production and consumption. And if I look at the issue from the point of view IEP, which is a European sustainability think tank, at the moment in Europe, if everyone adopted our consumption practices, you would need, in terms of resources, the equivalent of 2 planet Earth. So obviously this is not really possible. And if we put that at the backdrop of President Trump's decision, we can see that on one side we have some of the policymakers still running an absolutely obsolete agenda. I was at the think tank 20 last week, which brings think tanks from all sorts of disciplines from the G20 countries. And there's an emerging consensus that we need a completely new paradigm in terms of economics. Science has advanced, so now we're well aware of the planetary boundaries. We're also aware that you cannot have societies, you know, the theme here is bridging divides where there's too much inequality. Science has also advanced in terms of its understanding of well-being. And we also have the 4th industrial revolution, where clearly we think that the rate of disruption linked to technology, to the job market, you know, we have seen nothing so far. So really turning this around, it seems clear that resource efficiency needs to be at the center of the new economic model, and that's why there's a lot of excitement in Europe in terms of moving to a circular economy, and I think that will be also an area for cooperation with China. But the most difficult question will be that of lifestyles. Around 50% of carbon emissions can be attributed to the richest 10% of people around the world. Their average carbon footprint is 11 times as high as the poorest half of the population. And so I think the lifestyle issue is going to be probably the most intractable political issue for politicians. I was speaking with somebody from the Commission, and they say, well, we all know at some point we need to ask the question of lifestyle, but that's akin to political suicide.
Do you seriously think that drive will come from politicians? I have not heard one. I come from a relatively progressive country, and I don't hear any politicians in Denmark saying to people, you know, you have to stop eating all that meat, or you have to take other ways to go to holiday, or I don't hear that, not from mainstream parties anyway.
Exactly, I completely agree with you. So I think it's going to have to come from non-state actors, and what I mean by that is local authorities, which are at the front line and sometimes cannot just keep their eyes shut because they deal with lots of the problems firsthand. Civil society, I think there are more and more voices in business that are looking at this sort of issues. And to finish, youth. I mean, if you look at the surveys done about millennials and their consumption patterns, you see a very different approach to consumption. So it's going to have to come from non-state actors and from innovation, and then the governments will follow, but they'll follow last, and probably Mr. Trump never.
Femke, you told me just before the panel that to get here from Utrecht, just outside of Amsterdam, you took the train and not the plane. But you also said that it was actually a more expensive solution than if you had taken the plane. So that goes into maybe the heart of the study that you've been doing, that we're not giving the right incentives to move this process forward.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, many of the sustainable solutions out there are more expensive than the polluting ones. And that is a big problem because it inhibits us all of us to take these decisions every day on a day-to-day basis in what we purchase, how we eat, how we drive around or move around. And this has a lot to do with our fiscal systems that we've created, because these systems were built in a pre-digitized world, pre-globalized, pre-climate change world. And mainly government budgets are based, at least in Europe and in the US as well, on taxing labor. So work is really expensive, hiring someone is really expensive, whereas natural resource use and pollution is hardly taxed or even subsidized. On a global level, renewables are fossil fuels are actually subsidized twice the amount of renewables. So there hardly is a level playing field for new technologies, also because deploying these new technologies is often more labor intensive. You would need people to install these technologies, but also develop them, maintain them, repair. And this goes for all the products that we use. I mean, every decision that we make with regard to our consumption pattern, indeed, do I take a train or a plane? Do I have my iPhone repaired or not? Do I simply purchase a new one? It's in the supermarkets where sustainable products are more expensive generally than the ones that do pollute the soil, etc. So this is about incentives, and our fiscal systems are not fit to serve in this day and age. So it's about time we update our systems and to enable economic growth that is based more on human capital, human talents and capabilities, rather than the extraction of natural resources. So to align tax systems with the SDGs, that is going to be a big issue for the upcoming years.
And who do you see as the driver in this process? Because again, also here, I mean, so you've been working with it, you're publishing reports, but again, this is not at the heart of the political process right now.
It's
at
true.
least not when we get specific.
Yeah, it's true. So today is about strategies, climate strategies for a connected world. And if there's anything that connects us all, it's fiscal systems and connects all these issues that we need to solve. So that's complicated, and it generally doesn't match politicians' short-term window, but it does match business long-term interest of value creation and staying, ahead of competition. And this is where I see a lot of things happening, where the business community is developing new strategies, new technologies, and especially, for example, in the circular economy. But as I said, these business models of repair, maintenance, recycling, etc., it's all labor intensive. So there's a barrier in our system for businesses to move into this field and to upscale these activities. So the idea is to shift tax away simply from labor to natural resource use and pollution and consumption in order to shift these incentives. And that sounds difficult, which it is, of course. I mean, there's a lot to do, but it can be done. We've looked at a scenario for the EU, so applying a tax shift scenario to 27 of the 28 countries. And we've done this research with the big tax firms, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, and PwC, as well as Cambridge Econometrics and TrueCost. And the scenario shows that you can actually have higher GDP levels, much higher employment levels. You can even create 6.6 million jobs in the EU by 2020 and have lower carbon emissions. So there is really no reason not to do it other than political will and courage. And this is where businesses come in, and they can help politicians to push for better measures and to push for a system that actually supports sustainable and inclusive growth rather than work against it.
And Philip, I will come to you in a second, but let me just jump to you here, Isabel, and say, so in your daily job and with your colleagues in large French companies, are you pushing for this transition? Is that on the top of your agenda when you're when you have contacts with the political level?
Yes, it is at the core of the priorities for everybody, and not only in Europe, by the way. Not just, if I may, to rebound on what has just been said. If I launch this question of fiscal scheme, a key point is to set up a CO2 price. I mean, in a lot of regions, you already see renewable technologies at grid parity. When we say at grid parity, it means that to produce solar and power, for example, is more or less at the same price as if you produce this power through gas or coal. I just come back from the Middle East. We produce in the Middle East for 2.4 cents for each kilowatt hour. It's 2 times less expensive than with gas. So in a lot of regions, in fact, you don't need any CO2 price to rebalance the cost of conventional and renewable energy. But in a lot of regions, let's take Indonesia, for example, when you have here a lot of coal, brown coal. This brown coal is for the moment, at least, more expensive. We need this price signal, which is the same kind of measure as the idea to work on fiscal schemes, but a CO2 price would be a real way to accelerate this move and to accelerate the development of.
But what about on the French level? Do you support a change from income taxation to taxation on consumption?
For CO2 price in particular? Yeah, so France is pushing. The fact is that at EU level, for the moment, there is no consensus to set up a CO2 price. So there is a CO2 scheme, which is a market mechanism, but leading to something which is ridiculous in terms of price for carbon. So it's 4 euro per ton, which is nothing. So it cannot make the difference and provoke the balance between the two. That's not enough.
Philip, we're talking here about an industrial revolution, arguably the largest one in a century, and you're actually from Wales, and you told me when we talked before the panel that you've seen in your home region of Wales what industrial revolutions can do to actual people. Even though they benefit in the larger scheme of things, they can actually be very tough for the people who find themselves in the middle of it. And I think also, when we look back at the Trump decision to pull out last week, I think at the center of his argument was also one about social issues, about being the representative of the people of Pittsburgh rather than the people of Paris. I wonder if you could get us into how do we create the right connection between this industrial revolution that we seem to agree is unstoppable and then the social agenda that needs to be part of it.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, and good morning, everybody. Is anybody else here from Wales, by the way? Am I the only one? Okay, thank you. What a shame. Quote, Donald Trump's withdrawal from the agreement moves the USA and the world back in time to rivers so toxic they burn and are so noxious it poisons. Trump's retreat makes the USA deadly again. That is a quote from the leader of the Steel Workers Union in the United States of America, and guess where he was speaking from? His union headquarters in Pittsburgh. All the unions got together yesterday from the G7 countries and were very clear. We are not going to allow, and we will become even more determined, that this man doesn't turn this world into a toxic swamp on his terms. This is going to make us, the Green Movement, you and others, even more determined to prove this man wrong. At a time when he is about to make America sicker again, he is also, at the same time, going to be denying health benefits to up to 30 million people. This man is getting it wrong. Now, you mentioned, Isabel, a revolution in the head. We want to see a revolution on the ground. We want to see a revolution in the approach. We want to see a revolution in the way that we deal with industrial transformation. In my country, the mine workers and the mining communities, and of course that 1% of owners, made Wales great. Cardiff hosted the Champions League, built an infrastructure in the city on the back of coal, which sustains today. But nevertheless, if you go up to those mining communities, it took a generation to recover. I asked if anybody was Welsh because we have a Welsh singer. He's a funny guy. His name is Max Boyce. Anyone from England is here? He's the guy that insults you on the day that Wales play England at rugby at Twickenham. But it's done with great grace and good humour. And he produced a song called "The Pithead Baths Are a Supermarket Now." And what he was singing about was the London bankers, as he called them, coming to town with their bankers' briefcases, shutting down the mining community with a political decision, as we know, with Margaret Thatcher. And then nothing was done in return for them. It took those communities a generation to recover. A Welsh government that invested, that had political authority to do things, to have some joined-up thinking to help those blighted communities. At one time, for every job vacancy in Merthyr Tydfil, where the mines closed 30 years ago, there were 32 applicants. A community abandoned. Therefore, what we are saying is, look, we have to change the model. We have to change a model which is unsustainable in economic, social, and environmental terms. You talk about the investment required and unleashing these animal spirits. Well, explain to me why there is $2 trillion of private money sitting in balance sheets, not sure where it's going to be destined, and why more is being spent on share buybacks than actually investing in research and development, now surpassing the revenue of the businesses concerned. We are very keen to say just transition. Prior to the Paris climate talks, we fought like hell to get 8 or 9 words in the declaration about a just transition and decent work. We fought for generations to get those sustainable development goals. We are not hearing this morning so far, but that's probably, I don't think that's deliberate by any stretch. We need to get this notion of a just transition across. We are telling our members that climate change can mean jobs, but they need to be sure that that's going to happen. They need to see a just transition about investment in their communities, about directed investment, about a different use of the subsidies, about some form of retraining and reskilling and social protection. And for goodness sake, give people a seat at the table. We now have established on the union side what we call a Just Transition Centre. And we've managed to find 10 examples on this planet which give us an indication of the way to go. Now, we weren't spoilt for choice. We were not spoilt for choice. Therefore, to bring people with us, you have to bear in mind the experience of communities that have been left stranded, that have been left behind. And they will ask the question, what does it mean for me and my kids? They understand the dangers of climate change and the trajectory that we are on. We've just done a global poll where 85% of the people polled, and this is a global survey, said we want policies to deal with climate change. We want climate action. But for goodness sake, if there's one takeaway for the policymakers in this room, apart from the joined-up thinking that is required, please have in mind that we are with you in this transition process, but for goodness sake, make it responsible, make it social, and make it just.
Do you think, is there a risk for I don't know how to phrase this, a populist backlash in Europe against climate change policies as the one that we've seen in the US?
The populist backlash is based on the fear and the insecurity which working people feel. Our labour markets have not recovered from the financial crash. They are very much aware that the profits were privatised and the losses were socialised. When you look at this election in the UK today, and people are surprised by the ascendancy of the Labour Party, maybe, but there are 13 million people in Britain living below the poverty line. And the majority of them are at work. We have seen a share of the wages. Why are we still talking about bridging divides? Because people feel it in their daily lives and in their pockets. And then when politicians come in and say, we're going to have this green revolution, and then you have the right wing saying, where's my market space in this? Where's the space for my message? They play on the fear of the neighbor, the fear of the migrant, and the fear that actually what will happen is not going to improve my life. And therefore, that's why I say climate change means jobs, so let's demonstrate it. And climate change requires a just transition. Let's show it. And it needs to invite working people in. All Trump did last week was to appeal to that sense of insecurity and fear and racism and division. And none of us at the OECD, you will not bridge a single divide with that message, and we intend to fight it.
Simon, there's a question from the floor, and I was thinking if maybe you would like to join in at this point. The question is, I'm interested to know more about the implication of the US withdrawal on the financial aspects of the UNFCCC and the CO2 emissions. Can you enlighten us on that? We're talking about the consequences on a strictly climate level, but there's also the whole financial part of the agreement.
Well, all I know is that the US has said it's not going to fund the Green Climate Fund, and it's looking at all of the other funding that it makes available. So assuming that that gets taken away, then there's a gap. Now, we've already had Mr. Bloomberg, I think, say, well, he'll underwrite part of that gap, and the question will be whether other countries decide to fill the gap. But I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to work out that if you defund something, there's less money to spend.
Femke, another question from the floor is it feasible to estimate the pollution value to calculate taxation, or is it just a political decision? And I think that's very interesting. Can we actually almost objectively calculate it, or does it just need to be a political decision?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. And of course, there's this whole issue of externality, of what is the true cost of a ton of carbon or a liter of water being extracted from the earth. And it's very important that we get a grip on those data and information. At the same time, I must say that it might not be needed to go up to those type of prices to already change the financial the incentives. So basically, it's about getting going, and then on the way figure out whether the price is high enough or not. Because if we wait for everybody to agree on the perfect external cost calculation of a ton of carbon, then I think it'll take another few decades. So we see already schemes around the globe being acted upon by governments, raising funds from carbon taxation or carbon pricing. And this is growing rapidly across the globe, but prices are very low, generally below 10 euros per ton. So getting those prices up will be important, but we don't need to wait and start off with let's say, the true cost of a ton of carbon, taking into account climate change and etc.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking a lot this morning about personal transport, cars and bikes and hydrogen cars and everything, but an interesting question also from the floor is what about, so even if we have all this progress in terms of personal transportation, or at least the potential that we see very clearly right now, the carbon footprint of the transportation sector as such is actually growing. Celine, how do you see that? How should we work with that?
Well, for very good reasons. In the past few years, there's been really a focus on the energy sector. But as we're moving forward, there are a number of sectors which, deserve much more attention. One is transportation. Another one is the construction sector. And I'd quite like actually to highlight the role of the agricultural sector. It is highly likely that when the IPCC puts out its new report next year, to keep temperature under 1.5 degree, that they will actually talk about the necessity to have carbon removals on a very large scale. And obviously that's a bit of a scary thought, because if you've looked at the potential technologies, you can see a lot of risk there. And agriculture is in this peculiar situation that with an increasing world population, there are lots of concerns around food security. At the same time, in the EU, it's already the fifth largest sector in terms of emissions, and it's going to grow in proportion if energy goes down. And it's one of the few sectors that could become a sink. So that's, for me, one area that is not being mentioned enough in debates, and where there's going to need to be an approach that will be quite different to that of the energy sector, because of the nature of the sector. Absorbing technology is much more difficult in the agricultural sector. And also because, as I said, it has lots of links with other sustainable development goals. Food security, biodiversity is another one. And then to finish with the transportation sector, obviously now in the EU, as part of the effort sharing regulation, it is one of the sectors that's being looked at. We also see very rapid technological change there, so there's more hope on the way. I think construction is probably more worrying, and certainly agriculture.
Shiji, we've been talking a lot about the need to limit consumption, and how much a very small part of the world population, the richest 10%, are responsible for a major part of the consumption and the carbon footprint. But how do you see this paradox in China? You talked to us about how the climate policy is enshrinked in the growth policy, in the poverty reduction, and of course there's this whole issue of a large Chinese population that aspire to get the same wealth, the same living standard as they can see everywhere else in the world. Do you think is there a willingness to do personal sacrifice in this respect for these policies in China?
Yes, in our national strategy, we emphasize the green and low carbon on the production side. We also emphasize the green and low carbon on the consumption side. And I think we have developed a set of roles, institutions, and to encourage people to, consume rationally. But we have to understand for a developing nation, people get used to with poverty. They are eager to be living a life what you people in the OECD countries are living. But we can explain to them that it is legitimate to have enough food, to have affordable, decent house, and to travel conveniently. But just to take travel as an example, you don't need to own a car to enjoy the riding. So that's why we need to imagine what kind of transportation system we can have in the future. The example I mentioned about the shared car and this electric car management system, I think in the future we will encourage people to share cars which could be driverless, run on electricity. Electricity can come from wind, solar, etc. The example I cited in Chongqing City is that they use the hydropower to recharge the battery when the demand is low at night, and they use it for the day. But somehow I have to confess that we haven't found the final solution yet. Look at the sales, car sales. Each year we sell more than 20 million passenger cars. I think last year more than 20 million passenger cars. Only a very small fraction of them are electric cars. But given the scale economy, given the innovation on all sides, battery, material, management system, etc. We can we can foresee a future that in the future the transportation system could be green and low carbon that can meet people's demand for easy travel.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's a question from the floor here, and I really want to put it to the panel, and maybe a couple of you want to join in. Maybe, I don't know if Isabel, if you want to give it a first shot, maybe. And the question goes to the heart of the discussion about the connected part of this discussion. We're talking a lot about the need for public-private partnerships to try to also establish the right funding for this process. And the question is there any example of a joint public-private action to empower indigenous communities on sustainable energy solutions? So,
yeah, not an easy question, but,
yeah.
Something is clear. To set up, to make that it is effectively a revolution on the ground, as you said, we need a lot of money, a lot of trillions of investments. This money is available. It's not a question of availability. A lot of money in the system. Look, they have difficulty to find investments. They are, in some cases, ready to invest at negative interest rates. So there is money. That's not the question of availability. The question, in my view, is to create the conditions to make that this money can be invested in these new systems. In a lot of cases, this investment, they have to be implemented in countries where regulatory risk is significant, political risk is significant. And here, in my view, is one of the key elements we have to work on. And as far as regulation is concerned, it is of course a key challenge. I mean, to make that this private money, which is of course a big and much bigger pocket than public money, you have to create the conditions to lower the risk. Or you are a very expensive cost of capital. And cost of capital in this new wave of investment, in this new kind of infrastructure, is key. You know, for a solar farm, cost of capital accounts for 70%, 70 of the cost of energy. So we have to work to, well, free up this big pocket of private money and to make that this private money can be invested in this project. And in fact, some risks can be mastered by industrial players. The operational risk, it is our métier to master. It's normally. But political risk, we cannot. Regulatory risk, we cannot. So to work with countries on the best regulations, to create these conditions, to make that we have something reliable, with no retroactivity in the measures and in the decisions, with stability in the rules of the game, and even maybe to set up a mechanism that could mitigate this risk. We created, just one word about that, an association. It is not for-profit association. The name of it is Terawatt Initiative. Terawatt Initiative, I chair it, is an association gathering the players, the private players, willing to work on that kind of things. That is to say, regulation, mitigation mechanism. And we are asked by ISA, International Solar Alliance, which is a public association gathering 121 states, led by Modi, India, to make proposals to build this kind of mitigation mechanism, to make that when you are a private player, you decide to invest in a country with a high level of political risk, instability, political instability, you can buy this insurance. And then we can work to unlock this huge amount of private money first, and to convince the Fidelity, BlackRock, and all these private funds, pension funds, to invest their money on that first, and second, to decrease the cost of this money. And it is really a key element. This is the beginning of our work, but I welcome all the players here. We would like to join us, to feel welcome, because really I believe it is a key element to trigger what we all wish.
And key to broadening the whole process to not just be in a very very little number of countries, but to actually be a broader effort, as I understand you correctly.
Absolutely, because I said, well, this revolution, which is a fair one, really, I believe, because it is a way to bring energy to 2 billion people having no access or bad access to it. So it is really something which is full of hope. I fully agree with you that for the workers, it is also key to organize this transition in a smart way and soft way. But fundamentally, it is a fair revolution. But it means that effectively you need to invest in countries where there is almost nothing and where the political stability is not there. And then this mechanism to mitigate this risk, I believe it is a key element.
Femke, do you want to join in here?
Yes, I fully agree, and I was just want to notice that investment follows profitability. So wherever profitability can be reached, that's where the money goes. And very interesting development over the last few years is that businesses are actually moving ahead, expecting there to be a price on carbon soon or in future, and so they use more than 500 corporations now use an internal carbon price, a fictitious, let's say, carbon price in their books to improve their long-term decision making, and many hundreds of them are planning to do so within the next couple of years. So this is so fascinating that the business community is actually ahead of governments. And right now, I read that 1,200 cities, states, and businesses in the US, as well as universities, have stated that they will continue with the goals of the climate agreement. So this is a really new situation where businesses and organizations are ahead of governments, and they will push also for the regulation that is needed to fulfill their needs and their goals.
There's another aspect to investment which I think is important, is mobilizing the resources and mobilizing the funds. And when we look at what we call workers' capital, pension funds invested in stock markets around the world, it amounts to something like, I think it's $30 trillion. And there are organized conversations taking place between the trustees and the people within the organization for them to put the emphasis on investing in green energy and alternative energy. When it comes, that's one place. Secondly, the private sector could do a lot more. I think it is clear since the financial crash of 2008, the level of investment taking place in the United States and in Europe is not sufficient. And there's a great deal of funding sitting in balance sheets which could be used to a more useful, innovative use than share buybacks, which Reuters, not me, called the cannibalization of the corporate world. So there's an issue of what businesses having the means to invest but not doing so. And that has to be unlocked. I think also when it comes to public and private, we should also see the role of the state as a facilitator. You'll be more familiar with the situation in Denmark, but a decision was taken a long time ago with the social partners to move away from dependency on coal and fossil fuels into a brand new world of particular wind. Wind as a source of energy, and the same in Germany. But that required an act of great courage, a great commitment, also investment, public and private. And now you have a happy situation where I think up to a third of the energy that you use in Denmark is now not just powered by the bicycles that you all ride, but by wind. So I think that dimension of the engagement is important. And then we have other issues. We in our Just Transition document, which is out there, we have a case of Port Augusta in Australia, and I'm familiar to a certain extent with the details of the local workforce, the local unions, the local business, actually coming up with a plan to move away, to diversify, to develop a new energy menu, if you like. And then I remember the point that we make in it is you have people who are moving in the right direction, doing the right things, and then for whatever reason, either at state or at national level, the kind of public sector peace that people were looking for simply didn't happen. So I suppose at the end of the day, this conversation about climate strategies has to be about the whole picture, frankly, not just about changing the taxation of labor or profit, not just about taking subsidies away from fossil fuels, but having a whole big picture. And I think this would be really attractive for political parties to. I know the Green Party struggled to get political traction because their arguments have been taken elsewhere. But nevertheless, this is an opportunity to reposition a nation, to reposition a country in terms of meeting the challenges of the future in both its climate and in its digital content.
But let me jump in. That's very interesting, and I think we're getting to something. It's all very interesting. We're getting to something crucial here, and I want to maybe have you join in, Simon, here, because I think when we talk about getting the big picture, I said before that I don't see any main political parties really driving the argument for big change in consumption and in the behavior. But there is actually in Denmark, and I think you have that in more countries, you have one party that is kind of branding itself completely on being the green climate change party. They promote eating less meat and the whole green climate agenda. And in fact, what happens with this party is they get a lot of popular support. They had a very good election the last time, but they're also ridiculed a little bit because they're considered to be the fantasy people, the people with, you know, who's just flying in the air with green balloons and completely detached from reality. So, Simon, with the research that your department has been doing and with your experience, is there any? Do we have any front runners here that we can look to where it has been, where we've succeeded in connecting the dots and in promoting policies that that combine those issues that we've been talking about here?
Well, let me say that just can I back up a bit? I mean, I could always say, look, there's Sweden, there's Denmark, there's the UK, there's France more recently. I mean, you can always find countries which have done some good things, and they've done some bits, and that's great, and we encourage them to go further. But I don't think that just having a party that says we're going to do it all is going to solve anything, because what about the other parties? I mean, you really have to build the case in a country, and I say a country because we still operate at the level of countries. Countries have to build the case to change, to make a systemic change, and it means doing everything, not just doing bits. And I did want to pick up on a debate which has come through here about, is this unstoppable? I mean, it's not unstoppable in this, it's not stoppable in the sense that technology will suddenly freeze and start going backwards. So things which have started to happen will carry on. I don't think that's the issue. The question is, will it happen at a scale sufficient to get there in time? And at the current level of emissions, there's enough atmospheric space for somewhere between 15 and 30 years more carbon emissions. That's it. There is a serious time problem. So unless you're working across the board, you're not going to get there. You could end up with a fantastic decarbonised electricity system, which might flow into a fantastic decarbonised mobility system. But if you've meanwhile left steel, cement, chemicals on the side as too hard, if you've gone on designing cities on a scale which is going to make it difficult to get some of the hard emissions, if you've left the built environment out, I mean, you can go on and on. So I think it's the first thing to say is that governments need, working with all the stakeholders, and that's with lower levels of government, regions and cities, with stakeholders in society, with the unions, with businesses, have to come up for their country with a coherent, somebody used the word coherent, a coherent picture. And it won't be the same in every country. Everyone's got different challenges. Everyone's got easy things they can do first. But one of the things that we have been saying, and we published this rather excessively thick book a little while ago for a German G20 initiative, Investing in Climate, Investing in Growth, says that you really have to take regard for long-lived things. It's infrastructure. There's tons of things which you can change relatively quickly, but if it comes to laying down investments which will still be chugging away or providing their services in 20 years, in 25 years, in 30 years, then if you wire them the wrong way now, you live with the consequences forever. So infrastructure, whether it's buildings, whether it's roads, whether it's energy systems, we've got to get that right fast. And one of the ways to do that, we recommend, is having a pipeline for infrastructure, in the sense that the government sits down and maps out, not in some central planning hardwired way, but maps out where infrastructure either needs to be built or refurbished. And you communicate that to the private sector so they've got a coherent picture of the investment opportunities. Unfortunately, most of our countries, most countries in the world, don't take that approach. Things are on again, off again. Priorities start, they stop. And it's that sort of thing which means that the investment funds that Isabel was talking about, they're never going to find their way there. Because if you're laying something down for the long term and plans keep changing, well, you might look somewhere safer in the short term. So I think there's a real issue about the speed with which we need to move, the fact that we need to move systemically, and we've got to think particularly hard about the things which are long-lived, because lay them down the wrong way and we really have made a bed of nails to lie on.
But that goes back to the point of the question I was making, that it needs to be at the top of the agenda. And I think in many countries, even in modern countries, even in the most industrial, in the richest countries, that is not the case. It is not the top of the agenda, at least maybe in policy speeches, but when it comes down to actual policy, oftentimes it is not.
It may not be at the top of the agenda. In some countries, though, it's well embedded in the agenda in a way that speaks. I mean, we often note the fact that the United Kingdom actually put together, through a tripartisan agreement in Parliament, an act and a process for laying out carbon budgets 5 years at a time, going well into the future. And the UK is now debating what the carbon budget will be as we enter the 2030s. That's not bad. There's not many parliaments that have gone that far ahead. So, I mean, just to take one example, there are other countries trying to generate mechanisms to do similar things. I don't think it's not a question of flag waving, it's not a question of gestures, it's a question of having institutions and decision-making systems which mean that you can't ever get away from the climate imperative wherever it is you're working. So when it comes to infrastructure, and it's a key one, it doesn't matter whether it's the mobility sector, energy sector, whatever, that has to be hardwired into the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think we have time for one very last question from the audience, and I don't know, Celine, if maybe you want to answer that. Do you see the European Union stepping up for the Green Climate Fund? Do you see that happening, or do you think that was something that should be happening?
So the United States had pledged $3 billion. They delivered one so far, so you have a $2 billion gap. The issue of the Green Climate Fund is always a complicated one with the European Union, because it's actually the member states decide whether to pledge. And there's been always back and forth as to whether they could have a coherent approach to the Green Climate Fund. I think in general, and obviously in a context where you have a lot of populism, it is fairly difficult politically to justify giving more aid. However, we all know that without a vibrant Green Climate Fund, we will not be able to achieve the outcomes that Simon was talking, that are in line with science. So I think, yes, the European Union should step up. It's also very interesting. China has made already pledges in terms of green climate finance. They're also at the helm of supporting South-South cooperation. So it shouldn't be only the European Union. There are other countries who are able to fill in the gap. But it's also very important that public support, public finance, is not too much diverted to the private sector. I understand completely the need to reduce the political risk. Meanwhile, if you believe in the SDGs, and I certainly do, you would think that your money might be better spent supporting the rule of law and the quality of governance, and investing in peace building in those countries. yes, you can reduce political risk, but only to a certain extent if countries are about to collapse. Yes, you can protect the rights of investors, and God knows this is not very popular, ISDS, but there's a limit to that. So I think it's really important to not become overly focused on climate change until the entire global governance systems towards climate, because you might get into bad decisions. One last point I wanted to make is the issue of local governance. At our institute, we research the use of EU structural funds in terms of supporting energy efficiency in the EU in the last programming period. And one of the key challenges coming up is the capacity of local authorities. If local authorities are to be at the helm of the transition, they need to have the capacity to understand financial markets and to be able to use the financial instruments they need to be making all the investment decisions that we've talked about in terms of infrastructure. So that would be also another element to think about how to support local governance, and that's certainly one of the priorities of the C40.
Thank you. Time is running fast, and I think with this panel, it's been extraordinarily interesting. I've learned a lot, and with this panel, with so many different approaches to the agenda, we've also had a lot of different kinds of inspiration, and I really think we've at least proven with this panel that there is the title of the panel, which I did not choose, but was chosen by the organizers, choosing the word "connected" was very, very well thought of, because the things are connected in so many ways, even to the extent that you made in your last point, that it can also be connected in the way that too much focus can actually kind of harm the process, because we create other problems for ourselves elsewhere. So that's, I think, also an important point to take away from this. I really want to thank you all very much for your contributions, and I just want to invite you all to join me in thanking the panel.